The 2024 Mets had a very hot June. But that last series, where they lost 2 out of 3 to the Houston Astros, another surging team, had many questioning if the Grimace run was over. The Mets open up July splitting a series with the Washington Nationals, and then splitting another series with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Before the All-Star break, they are to face the Nationals again in a 3-game series, and then the Colorado Rockies for another 3-gamer. And, well, against these two bottom-of-the-barrel teams, the Mets do what they're supposed to. For the first time in 2024, on Friday, July 12th, the Mets briefly held sole possession of the second wildcard spot. Unfortunately, they fell back down to third just a day later, despite the win, and they lost the next day. It would have been nice to head into the All-Star break on a 6-game winning streak, but the Mets held on to their playoff positioning and seemed to have recaptured some of that momentum. Before this last game, on the 14th, I stopped by Citi Field to ask fans what they were feeling about the season so far.
Now, my first question for you. Oh my god, I got some shit in my eye.
Edit that out. Keep it in.
Cut that.
Keep it in.
I might keep it in. Blooper reel. All right, so my first question is, the Mets started out kind of mid this season and then had a really bad May, people were calling them dead already.
They closed it out pretty good.
And now have surged all the way to the second wild card spot.
Go. Thank you for Grimace.
Yeah.
Grimace saved us.
So I just want to ask, how have your expectations for the Mets changed this season through the ups and downs?
Well, for me, I think they always got a shot. They have a really good team, really good coach. They got a lot of players. They just got to put it together. So not surprised that they're playing this good.
For me, I never give up on my team. Whether they win or lose, man, I stick a Mets fan, and I never give up. And I swear they're going to win every single year. And come April, I swear they're going to win the World Series. And one day I'm going to experience 86 again, baby.
Same thing. Same thing. I never lose hope on the Mets. They will always give me hope, no matter what they accomplish, what month it is. I will always have hope for my Mets, so I still have hope for them.
Woo! Awesome.
When we started watching the season, we didn't have high expectations. And then pretty much around June, and Jose Iglesias, OMG, Grimace, all that, we were all sell. Maybe get Pete back next year. Probably not going to happen.
Not.
But I think we're all back on buy at the deadline.
By the deadline, Mets are back. We were down low to start the season. We were middle of the season. Down low again. Now we're back. Mets are back. We're making the playoffs. Wild card run. You heard it here first.
Well, I don't really take too, seriously the beginning of the season anytime it's a season, because I'd rather the Mets start off bad, but then not choke down the stretch like we've done, in the height of me being a Mets fan in like the 07, 08 type of years. So I'm okay with them not doing great at first, because then at least you weed out some of the bandwagon fans at least,
My second question is, so since the off season, pretty much all season this year, Pete Alonso has been the subject of a lot of trade talks. Do you think the Mets have kind of played their way out of those trade talks, and do you think they should be buyers or sellers at the deadline?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. I think they're going to be buyers. I don't think we're selling anybody. Pete Alonso, listen, everyone has a bad year. Unfortunately, this is the year Pete's not doing the greatest. But listen, he's El Capitan with Lindor and others. Let's keep Pete. We want a franchise player. He'll turn it around the second half after the All-Star game.
Yeah, he's a franchise player. The Mets got to keep him. I can't see them getting rid of him. It's all talk to try to get the most you can while he's playing great. But again, he's having a mediocre season. But we got to keep him. I mean, he's a franchise. You can't get rid of your homegrown star players. You know what I'm saying?
I agree.
I've always been a big Pete Alonso fan. I think he brings a lot to the team, similar to like a David Wright type of vibe back in the day. So I would say they should keep him, try everything they can to keep him. He's a big New York guy. He's made it known he wants to be here. So I think they should keep him. I know these talks always come up, mid-season, especially if they're doing bad or whatnot, but he seems pretty like a good head on his shoulders. He's not really playing too much into it with the media. He's just trying to do the best he can, try to be a leader on the team. So hopefully it works out. Hopefully Steve Cohen, realizes the importance he brings as a leader.
Awesome. And do you think the Mets as a whole should be buyers at the deadline?
Yeah, probably. They probably should. I mean, I know they've had some injuries recently with the pitchers, so definitely pitching is where their head should be at.
My last question is more of a fun one. You guys have been Mets fans for a long time. What do you think is the worst trade in Mets franchise history?
Worst trade? That's a good question. Maybe when we got rid of Lenny Dykstra. He went to Philly and got a chip, and that kind of hurt.
That's a good one. No one said that yet.
Damn, I don't know, man. That's a tough one.
Doc Gooden was a big one, too, when he left us. And Strawberry. Strawberry went to the Dodgers. That hurt home because he's our guy.
It's hard to pick one, you know? Yeah, for me, you know what? Dr. K's got to probably be it, man. Dr. K, that shit hurt, man. Sorry to curse. I don't know if I could curse or not, but, man, that shit dropped me to my knees, especially when he won the chip with the Yanks, man. Oh.
Doc Gooden. That was it. That's it for me. Yeah, that's it.
Doc Gooden was a killer.
That hurt.
Killer.
Being that I've been a fan for the longest coming to Shea Stadium, I was friends with Seaver. When they traded Seaver and Kingman, I mean, come on. Seaver was the hardest, again, the franchise player. But, you know, they traded and we got Pat Zachary, Steve Henderson, and a couple other guys. But again, I was coming here every day. And matter of fact, when Seaver got traded, the first game back, when he pitched and beat the Mets 5-2, got a couple of hits and a double, me and this kid, Mike, we were like the first ones in the stadium. We always there. We get to know the players and everything. Seaver said, you know what? I got to go talk to my guys before he talked to the reporters. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So, I mean, that to me, that was the trade that hurt my heart.
I didn't have an answer. You jogged my memory. Cano. He played for a team that wore SpongeBob uniforms by the end of that. So, Cano.
He's tearing it up in Mexico right now. He's hitting like 450. Yeah.
He's playing against Bartolo Colon. Yeah. What do we?
No, I think he's playing in like Dubai.
He's Dubai. I think Jamie Moyer might also be there. So maybe that's the same thing. Mets are back.
All right. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
We last checked in depth at least, with how the Mets were doing as individual players back in episode 2. A lot's changed since then, so let's take a look at the roster again, from top to bottom. Let's start with the highlights. Infielder Mark Vientos has finally broken out. Since being called up on May 15th, he's hit .286, .344, .537, slugged 11 home runs, and played a serviceable third base. I've unfortunately neglected to talk about him to this point, but he's definitely been one of the catalysts for this Mets surge. It's actually an interesting story for this season. Vientos was briefly called up on April 27th to replace Starling Marte for a couple games, who was added to the bereavement list. In his first game, Vientos hit a dramatic walk-off home run against the Cardinals. He was then optioned back to AAA on April 30th to make room for Marte coming back. Vientos was then called back up on May 15th after the Mets DFA'd Joey Wendell. Since then, he's absolutely torn it up. It's the breakout the Mets have been waiting for years. Francisco Alvarez has been fantastic since coming back from the IL. He looks much more mature and poised in his at-bats, and he's looked even better behind the dish. Lindor has bounced all the way back from his first half slump, and has been hitting exceptionally. Despite some down numbers, Brandon Nimmo has still been great. Harrison Bader has surprisingly become a consistent bat in the lineup. JD Martinez may very well be the rock of the offense. They've got great production from bench bat Tyrone Taylor, and as I mentioned in the previous episode, Jose Iglesias has been the hottest hitter in the game for the past month and a half. The starting pitching has been decent, but maybe a bit inconsistent. Even so, they have certainly overperformed. Guys like Luis Severino and Sean Manaea have had great years compared to what was expected of them, and Jose Quintana and David Peterson are also having better seasons than last. The Mets, though, are certainly still missing Kodai Senga, who is set to come back after the All-Star break. The rotation is lacking depth beyond those four guys. The bullpen hasn't been very reliable either. We've already talked about Edwin Diaz's issues, but also Adam Ottavino, someone the Mets relied on a lot in the previous couple seasons, has regressed heavily. Reed Garrett has come back down to earth after his early season dominance. Adrian Hauser was demoted from starter to reliever early in the season, but hasn't looked good in either role. And Jake Diekman is just a nightmare to watch. There are some bright spots in the bullpen. Dedniel Nunez has been lights out, and Jose Butto finally looks like a real major league pitcher. But other than that, it's definitely an area for improvement. While the Mets have had a spectacular offense this season, there are a couple of players still struggling. Jeff McNeil has been borderline unplayable at many points this season and has not come back to the mean after his down 2023. Most notably, however, are the struggles of Pete Alonso, who was, to the surprise of many, the Mets' only All-Star this year, over players thought to be more deserving like Lindor, Nimmo, or Severino. Many of his numbers are down from previous years. His OPS is under 800, his slugging is under 500, and by this point in the season last year, he had hit 7 more home runs. His average of 240 is up from last year, but it's still low compared to the 271 he hit in 2022, or even the 262 in 2021. Of course, in today's baseball, average isn't everything, but there's a huge difference between a power hitter that can bat 271 and a power hitter that bats 240. As far as his All-Star selection goes, well, many fans seem to think that he somehow blackmailed his way into it. See, Alonso was a regular yearly participant in the Home Run Derby. He won in 2019 and 2021, made the semifinals in 2022, but had a disappointing first-round exit in 2023. Regardless, he has the ability to hit mammoth home runs, and has a somewhat quirky approach to competing in the event, in the sense that he takes it, way too seriously. Anyway, he announced this year, and in the past, that he'll only play in the Derby if he's also named an All-Star. Some people think that therefore he was only appointed as an All-Star so that MLB could ensure he would also play in the Derby, and that's why he was picked over more deserving Mets players. I don't really think this is the case, but it's been talked about a lot in online baseball circles. I just can't see how MLB would put that much value on Alonso being in the Derby to do that. That being said, I don't have an answer as to why he's an All-Star over some other Mets. Personally, I probably would have gone with Lindor, or maybe Severino. Anyway, back to trade deadline stuff. There's a lot of room for interpretation as to how the Mets should approach this trade deadline. Should they stick to what was likely their original plan and sell one-year rentals like Martinez, Severino, or Minaya? Should they go all in and pick up the pieces that will put them in a playoff position? Is this past month-and-a-half stretch real, or are they pretenders? Will they regret going all in if they have another slump like they did in May? And should they trade Pete Alonso? The trade deadline is an anxiety-ridden time for Mets fans. More often than not, the Mets have been on the losing side of their trades throughout franchise history. We've already briefly covered a couple of trades that exemplify this. Gil Hodges for Jimmy Pearsall, Xavier Nady for Oliver Perez, Pete Crow Armstrong for Javier Baez, but there are far worse ones. Before we look at what the Mets did in 2024, let's take a look at some of these other trades. The first trade I'm going to discuss happened way back in 1969, in the offseason after the Mets' very first World Series win. The Mets traded outfielder Amos Otis to the Royals for third baseman Joe Foy. Otis was acquired by the Mets in 1966. He spent a lot of time in the minors, but was called up occasionally and got some major league at-bats. In 67, in only 19 games, he batted .220 with no power to speak of, an OPS plus of 60. The 1969 miracle season was even worse for Otis, as he only batted .151 in 48 games with an OPS plus of 13. Otis and manager Gil Hodges didn't really get along, as Hodges tried to make Otis into a full-time third baseman, which wasn't his natural position. Otis never got a very long stint in the majors, as he was constantly shipped up and down due to these problems. So, at the end of the 1969 season, in December, the Mets finally gave up on their Amos Otis third base experiment, and traded him to the Kansas City Royals for Joe Foy, an actual third baseman. In order to understand how bad this trade was, let's look at what the Mets got first. Foy would only last 2 seasons with the Mets. He was a pothead and had a tendency to show up to the field completely stoned, missing any balls hit towards him. As for Amos Otis, well, the Royals moved him to his natural position in center field, and the rest is history.
Amos Otis grounds a base hit up the middle, and Jackson will try to score.
bases loaded with one out in the first inning. The drive hit deep, way back in left field, and it's gone. A grand slam home run by Amos Otis. Wants Amos Otis to come out and take a salute, and he does.
In 1986, the Royals inducted Amos Otis into their franchise Hall of Fame. He was a fan favorite. Back in '69, the Mets were getting great production in center field from 26-year-old Tommy Agee, so they didn't feel like they needed another young center fielder. But Agee declined rapidly throughout the early 70s and was actually off the team by the time the Mets made their 1973 World Series run. The Mets replaced him by trading for 42-year-old Willie Mays, well past his prime. And then, for the rest of the 70s, the Mets were downright horrible. A player like Amos Otis could have made the difference in that 73 World Series. He was third in MVP voting that year. He was the first of many regretful cast-offs. This next one, though, oh boy. I'd like you to meet Nolan Ryan. Nolan Ryan, like Otis, was acquired by the Mets in 1966. He's been a decent, very serviceable pitcher thus far in his major league career. He was a huge part of the Mets championship run. In Game 3 of the NLCS against Atlanta, he pitched 7 innings of relief to get his first playoff win and complete the Mets sweep. And then in Game 3 of the World Series, Ryan threw 2 1/3 innings of relief to get the save against the Orioles. He bounced between relief and starting roles, but now was settling in more as a part of the rotation. And in 1971, he got off to a hot start. Nolan Ryan was showing flashes of something really, really special. The Mets rotation was already considered a three-headed monster with Tom Seaver, Jerry Koosman, and Gary Gentry. But with Nolan Ryan developing the way he was at this point, there was a lot to be excited about. And then we had the second half. To this day, this is still the second steepest ERA drop-off between halves in MLB history. Ryan just lost it. After posting a 2.24 ERA through the middle of July, it ballooned to a 3.97. It's December 10th, 1971. The Mets traded for California Angels shortstop Jim Fregosi. In the trade, they sent over Frank Estrada, Don Rose, Leroy Stanton, and Nolan Ryan. It clearly got to a point where the Mets were fed up with the inconsistency, but Nolan Ryan loved being a Met. He had great camaraderie with Seaver, and later in his career would credit him and his time with the Mets for shaping him into the pitcher he would become. He held on to a feeling of resentment towards the Mets for many years after they traded him. He felt betrayed. And I don't blame him. The business side of sports is ruthless. This was the 70s too, so it's not like he was getting paid tens of millions of dollars either. Jim Fregosi was a fantastically talented shortstop for the Angels. For the Mets, not so much. He played a season and a half with them before being shipped off to Texas and batted .233 with very little pop in his bat. But Nolan Ryan, who am I kidding? You know who Nolan Ryan is.
This may be it! Nolan Ryan, the 2-0 pitch. Fly ball, right field. Hermanchier in foul territory. Number 6 for Nolan Ryan. The Express has done it once again. That's it. Number 7 is in the books. The remarkable Ryan has done it again.
his number is. Retired number 34. It was thrown to his old catcher, Alan Ashby, and Alan caught the 5th no-hitter thrown by Nolan against the Dodgers. He threw him a split finger. One of those circles.
I can honestly say that I never felt so accepted and appreciated as I did by the Ranger organization, and then when I came to Arlington, by the fans of the Metroplex.
Congratulations.
So I have to tell you again, thank you, and I appreciate it.
Now fans will ask Nolan to take the mound once again here at Angel Stadium and throw out an honorary first pitch.
I want to thank the sports writers for this honor, and I'm humbled by it. And I'd like to say thank you to the guys that I faced over my career, which some of them are here and sitting on this stage today, and I can honestly say that I'm enjoying seeing them now more than I ever have.
Nolan Ryan was a first ballot Hall of Famer, one of the greatest pitchers of all time. Hard to think he wouldn't have made a difference for those lowly 70s Mets teams. And actually, let's talk about that for a second. The Mets were expected to be good in the early 70s, but as they always do, fell well short of expectations. They collapsed in the year after their 1969 World Series win, they underperformed in 1971, they collapsed again in 1972, they made the World Series once again in 1973, but lost to the A's in 7 games. It was all downhill from there. The 1974 season saw their first losing record since 1968. They fared a little better in 75 and 76, but could not escape the dregs of 3rd place and still missed the playoffs. Then, from 1977 to 1983, they never won more than 68 games. Just miserable. By 77, attendance at Shea Stadium had plummeted. It had been dubbed Grant's Tomb, after chairman of the team M. Donald Grant, who the fans blamed for running the team into the ground. Why did the fans blame Grant? Well, there's another trade we have to talk about to address that. I've briefly mentioned Tom Seaver here and there. He even came up in a couple of my interviews, so you should already know what's coming. Seaver was the face of the Mets franchise up to this point. His nickname was literally the franchise. He won Rookie of the Year for the Mets in 1967, and he hasn't looked back since. He's been sensational. He was a huge reason that they were able to win the World Series in 1969, and he came second in MVP voting that year. He's already won 3 Cy Young Awards, and that's 3 more than Nolan Ryan ever won, and has been an all-star almost every year he's been in the majors. He led the league in ERA and ERA plus 3 times, in strikeouts 5 times, and in FIP 4 times. He's been one of, if not the, best pitcher in baseball for the past decade. And he has beef with M. Donald Grant. It's June 15th, 1977. All season long up to this point, Grant and Seaver have been at each other's throats. Seaver wanted a contract extension. He was obviously an incredibly talented pitcher, and the Mets were the only team he had ever played for. He wanted to come back. But he and Grant were far apart on contract negotiations, and Mr. Grant was not exactly respectful about it. So much so that he enlisted the help of Daily News columnist Dick Young. Throughout the early goings of the season, Dick Young had been writing tons of articles attacking Tom Seaver for his greediness, solely blaming Seaver for not getting a deal done. M. Donald Grant was also rude to Seaver directly, claiming that he didn't deserve his nickname of the franchise and that he didn't belong at a certain ritzy Connecticut golf club, and even insinuating at one point that Seaver was a communist. It was pretty clear to everyone what had been going on. But still, even through all this animosity, Seaver was determined to work something out with the only team he ever knew. He went directly to the top, to team owner Lorinda DeRoulet, and asked if they could work something out. With the help of GM Joe McDonald, the three of them had actually negotiated a 3-year contract extension by the first week or so of June. But Dick Young and Grant went too far. Way too far. The very next day, after negotiating his contract, Seaver opened the Daily News to find that Young had written yet another article about him. Nolan Ryan is getting more now than Seaver, and that galls Tom because Nancy Seaver and Ruth Ryan are very friendly, and Tom Seaver long has treated Nolan Ryan like a little brother. Tom Seaver was enraged at the idea that Dick Young would bring his family into this vilifying web of lies. He marched right back over to DeRoulet and told her that the deal was off, and that he insisted he be traded because he refused to play under M. Donald Grant. And so, by midnight on the 15th, Tom Seaver was traded to the Cincinnati Reds. Fitting, I guess, for a communist. Mets fans were outraged. Seaver had given everything to the Mets. He was literally the franchise. He was New York royalty, and to see him treated so poorly left an awful taste in everyone's mouth. Even Mets players were completely shocked. What only made things worse was that on that same day, Dave Kingman, who had performed well for the Mets in the previous 2 seasons, was also traded to the San Diego Padres. In return for both of them, the Mets got Doug Flynn, Steve Henderson, Dan Norman, and Pat Zachary from the Reds. Remember him? And Bobby Valentine and Paul Siebert from the Padres. It seemed like the Mets either had no idea what they were doing, or they had completely given up. The day became known in Mets history as the Midnight Massacre. The Mets never finished above last place in each of the next 3 years. It's often cited as the worst trade in Mets history. But what if I told you it got worse? On December 16th, 1982, the Mets made another trade with the Cincinnati Reds. This time, to bring Tom Seaver back. Under new ownership, the Mets were looking to rectify the mistakes of their past, and that included bringing back the franchise. Seaver had a solid season in 1983 with a 3.55 ERA and 34 starts, and then it's January 20th, 1984. Major League Baseball is holding a free agent compensation draft where teams who lost a big-name free agent are allowed to pick someone new from a pool of unprotected players on other teams. It was a similar system to that of the Rule 5 draft, but it only lasted from 1982 to 1985. It's the Chicago White Sox turn to pick. They just lost right-handed pitcher Dennis Lamp to the Blue Jays and were looking to replace his production. They pick Tom Seaver. The Mets left Tom Seaver unprotected. GM Frank Cashin didn't think anyone would want a 39-year-old with a high salary. He was wrong. For the second time, the Mets let their franchise player go. Seaver was angry. He genuinely considered retirement, but ultimately, he decided to continue his career and pitch for Chicago. The Mets were just as mad at themselves as anyone. However, another transaction went down that day that we have to discuss. This is Mike Scott. He's a starting pitcher, drafted by the Mets in 1976. He made his debut in 1979. From 79 to 1982, he had a 4.64 ERA and an ERA plus of 77. Not exactly mind-blowing stuff. In fact, well below average for the time. So the Mets decided to make a move. During the winter meetings of 1982, the Mets traded Mike Scott to the Astros for outfielder Danny Heap. Scott's first couple years with the Astros was really more of the same. He ate up innings, but wasn't all that consistent, even going a measly 5-11 in 1984 with a 4.68 ERA. But then, a shift happened. In 1984, under pitching coach Roger Craig, one of the original 1962 Mets, Scott developed a splitter, a pitch that looks like a fastball up until it drops off the edge of a table. In 1985 and 1986, Mike Scott put up back-to-back seasons with 18 wins. He had a 3.29 ERA in '85, which he then lowered to an astounding 2.22 ERA in 1986, winning the National League Cy Young Award in the process. During the Mets World Series run in '86, they faced off against the Astros in the NLCS. The Mets won that series in 6 games, but both Astros victories in games 1 and 4 were carried by Mike Scott's pitching performances. They had no answer for him. Despite consistently facing accusations of doctoring baseballs, Mike Scott finished his career as a 3-time All-Star and a Cy Young Award winner with the Astros. Since developing his splitter, he never put up an ERA above 3.81 until his final season in 1991 at 36 years old. He remains one of the best starting pitchers in Astros history. And that's saying a lot. Hindsight is always 20/20 with the Mets. Of course, the Mets weren't missing him too badly. After all, they were the team that won the World Series in 1986, Scott's best year. But still, that 1986 team is often criticized for failing to become the dynasty that they were anticipated to be. Maybe a pitcher like Mike Scott could have helped with that. Okay, we'll get back to horrible Mets trades in a bit, but why don't we take a break from that for now and look at what the Mets did at the trade deadline this year? The Mets were active. Let's start with the pitching. The Mets really needed back-end rotation help, as well as some bullpen upgrades. For the rotation, they acquired Paul Blackburn from the A's in exchange for Cade Morris, their 25th ranked prospect. Blackburn has a 4.14 ERA to this point in the season. He doesn't have very high velocity, but relies on his 6-pitch repertoire to mix batters up and get outs. He's not ace material, but the Mets just need him to eat up some innings. I like this deal. Next, let's look at the bullpen. The Mets acquired Ryan Stanek, Phil Maton, Huascar Brazoban, and Tyler Zuber. Stanek and Maton are former Tampa Bay Rays, and both pitched well for the Astros during their 2022 World Series run, and despite their struggles this season, I feel fairly optimistic about them. Stanek's a hard thrower, and Maton is more finesse. Tyler Zuber is another former Tampa Bay Ray, but I'm not really sure what to make of him. I think he's mainly a potential upside kind of pick. Now, I really like the Huascar Brazoban pickup. He's got fantastic stuff, pitching to a 150 ERA plus for the Marlins this season. This feels like a really underrated pickup that could be a difference maker for the Mets. I'm high on him for sure. Lastly, as far as position players go, the Mets only made one move. They traded pitching prospect Tyler Stewart to the Nationals for outfielder Jesse Winker. Winker is a left-handed power bat, which the Mets were looking to get in order to replace the struggling DJ Stewart. After having a great all-star season for the Cincinnati Reds in 2021, in which he hit .305 with 24 bombs, Winker unfortunately has only been trending downwards. He had a slight bounce-back season this year, though, hitting .257 with 11 home runs through the deadline after an injury-shortened, miserable 2023 in which he hit under the Mendoza line. Once again, I'm optimistic about this pickup, partially because, well, the Mets and Jesse Winker have some funny history together. Back in late April 2019, the Mets were finishing a homestand with a series against the Cincinnati Reds. In Game 1, Jesse Winker, playing left field, had to deal with some heckling Mets fans in the seats behind him. Later that night, going into the top of the 9th, the game was tied 4-4. Edwin Diaz was in for the Mets to try and maintain the tie and give the team a chance to walk it off. Diaz gets Joey Votto to fly out to center. He then gets Eugenio Suarez to fly out to left. Up next is Jesse Winker. On the first pitch of the at-bat, Diaz fires a high 90s fastball. Right down the middle. Winker pulls the ball deep into the Mets bullpen to give the Reds a 1-run lead. After Reds closer Raisel Iglesias finished the game in the bottom of the frame, Winker turned around and waved goodbye to the fans that had been heckling him. In the press conference after the game, Winker delivered a backhanded comment saying that the lack of fans in the stands made the shit-talking stand out much more. That moment began a years-long feud between Winker and the Flushing faithful. In the third game of that series, Winker made a sliding catch for the final out, and once again waved goodbye to the fans. In the last game of the series, he was booed every time he stepped to the plate. He also got ejected from that game in the top of the 9th, after arguing balls and strikes with the home plate umpire. This time, it was the Mets fans who got to wave Winker off the field. The feud was reignited 2 years later. In 2021, in another Mets homestand against the Reds, a fan brought a sign to their seats in the left field bleachers. The sign read, "Jesse Winker, you're a straight-up bitch." What's funny about this, though, is that Winker actually took it in stride. He ended up trading an autographed baseball to the fan so that he could keep the sign for himself. I don't think there was any real beef here. It seems like for Winker and the fans, it was all fun and games. I also think as all this was going on, he secretly always wanted to be a Met. And now, we're reunited, on the right side of the field. We'll check in with the Mets again and how they do in the rest of July, but for now, let's pick back up with some more bad trades. The 1986 Mets roster was absolutely stacked. Former MVP Keith Hernandez and Hall of Famer Gary Carter led the way. A young Darryl Strawberry cranked out 500-foot home runs. The pitching staff was helmed by peak Doc Gooden, who seemed to strike out every batter he faced. And they had a great closer in Jesse Orosco. Everyone else, Lenny Dykstra, Howard Johnson, Mookie Wilson, Ron Darling, Bobby Ojeda, etc., etc. I could go on, but everyone else just filled their roles beautifully. They absolutely dominated baseball that year and cruised to win the franchise's second World Series title. Unfortunately, the team dealt with a plethora of off-the-field issues, mainly caused by the team's excessive drinking and drug use. I'm not going to delve into that now, but I needed to point that out for what's to follow. After that 1986 year, in the offseason, the Mets decided to make a trade. They sent Sean Abner, Stan Jefferson, Kevin Armstrong, Kevin Brown, and Kevin Mitchell to the Padres for Gene Walter, Adam Ging, and Kevin McReynolds. To this day, it is the most Kevins involved in a single trade in MLB history. The main pieces of this trade were two of these Kevins, Kevin Mitchell and Kevin McReynolds. Mitchell was a talented utility man who could play anywhere on the field, and for a bench bat, he played pretty well for the Mets in 1986. He also had the reputation of a hothead. He angered quickly and often violently, and that, mixed with the 1986 Mets' infamous drug and alcohol culture, was a recipe for disaster. In one incident, Dwight Gooden stopped by to check in on his teammate. He found Mitchell drunk and arguing with his girlfriend. When Gooden arrived, Mitchell allegedly proceeded to hold him, his girlfriend, and another bystander hostage in the room with a 12-inch knife. The scene escalated and ended with Mitchell picking up his girlfriend's cat and beheading it in one stroke. So the Mets traded him for the much more even-keeled outfielder, Kevin McReynolds. And McReynolds played really well for the Mets for a few years. He hit for power without sacrificing his average too much, and Mitchell didn't last the season with the Padres. He was traded to the San Francisco Giants. He had an okay 1988 season, about on par with his career stats, but with more playing time, but we're not here to talk about his 1988 season. We're here to talk about his 1989 season. In 1989, Kevin Mitchell broke out. He led the league with an OPS of 1.23, an OPS plus of 192, a slugging percentage of .635, and he hit 47 home runs with 125 RBIs. This performance won him an MVP award at season's end. For the Mets, well, by 1989, most of that 1986 core was broken up. That season really represented the end of their World Series window, their chance to build a dynasty. McReynolds' career began to tail off into the early 90s, while Mitchell still put up a few more fantastic seasons with the Giants and later the Reds. Later in his career, injuries slowed him down, but the damage was done. The quadruple Kevin trade went down as another Mets loss. The next Mets trade is kind of a two-parter. It starts in 1992. If you remember, the Mets were absolutely horrible that year, but they still had some good pieces. One of those pieces was David Cone, who I've mentioned before back in episode 2. The Mets acquired Cone in a trade with the Kansas City Royals in the offseason after 1986, and he was a great starting pitcher for them. He won 20 games in 1988 and came in third in Cy Young voting that year. And in 1992, he was the Mets' lone All-Star Game representative. After the All-Star Game, with the Mets being sellers at the time, they traded Cone to the Toronto Blue Jays for second baseman Jeff Kent. Cone finished the season with Toronto going 4-3 with a 2.55 ERA, and then immediately won the World Series with them. The next year, he went back to Kansas City, and in 1994, he won the AL Cy Young Award, going 16-5 with a 2.94 ERA. After a second stint with the Blue Jays, he was traded to the New York Yankees. He had 2 more All-Star appearances and came in 4th and 6th in Cy Young voting in 98 and 99. During his Yankees tenure, he won 4 more World Series titles. He also pitched a perfect game. Jeff Kent, on the other hand, was largely inconsistent with the Mets. He had his ups and downs, but couldn't maintain his power and had some injuries. He, also like Kevin Mitchell, had a reputation for being a hothead. He wasn't very well liked by his teammates and mainly kept to himself. So what did the Mets do? Well, they traded him to Cleveland in 1996 for Alvaro Espinosa and Carlos Baerga. He played there for a year and then signed with the San Francisco Giants in 1997. Jeff Kent's attitude never really improved. He infamously didn't get along very well with Barry Bonds during their tenure together. However, his play certainly did improve. A lot. From 1997 to 2002, Kent slashed .297, .368, .535. That's a .904 OPS. He averaged 29 home runs and 115 RBIs per year. In the year 2000, he hit .334 and put up a 1.21 OPS, winning the NL MVP award in the process. He went on to make 5 All-Star teams and win 4 Silver Sluggers. He was easily the most dominant second baseman in the league at the time. Neither Espinosa nor Baerga made much of an impact as Mets, and they were all the Mets really had to show for trading Kent and David Cone. Cone came back in his final year to play for the Mets, but he only went 1-3 in 5 games with a 6.5 ERA. He's mainly remembered for his stretch with the Yankees, and he's a commentator for them now. Kent carried his all-star level hitting into a tenure with the Astros and then the Dodgers as well, but he's also mainly remembered for his Giants years. I don't know if anyone really remembers them as Mets. In writing this script, I knew I wanted to include this next guy in some capacity, but I was struggling to figure out where. He's one of those guys that you pretty much just can't talk about Mets misery without mentioning. The only issue is that he, like Bobby Bonilla, was more of a bad free agent signing and not really a bad trade. I don't think bad free agent signings are generally that interesting because all you're giving up is money. But I had to talk about Bobby Bonilla because he's such an iconic part of Mets lore, and I feel the same way about this guy. And then I found out during my research that the Mets actually did trade for this guy, and traded him away the same season. Just 8 years before the Mets stint I was going to talk about. So it all works out. I was 3 years old in 2002, so forgive me for not knowing this off the top of my head. I am, of course, talking about the 2004 National League Rookie of the Year, outfielder Jason Bay. Bay was drafted by the Montreal Expos in the year 2000. He played very well in the minors, but the Expos ended up trading him to the Mets in March 2002 for utility infielder Lou Collier. This was not a bad trade. But the Mets then flipped Bay just 4 months later in a package to the San Diego Padres for pitchers Jason Middlebrook and Steve Reed. This ended up being a pretty bad trade. Jason Bay had some injury problems early in his career, but was finally healthy enough to qualify for Rookie of the Year in 2004, where he posted a .282, .358, .550 slash line with 26 home runs, winning the award easily. In his stints with Pittsburgh and later Boston, he was a 3-time All-Star, a Silver Slugger winner, and routinely hit 30-plus home runs a season. In 2009, his final season with Boston, he put up career highs with 36 home runs and 119 RBIs, and had an OPS of .921. And so, in the 2009-2010 offseason, the Mets signed Bay to a 4-year, $66 million contract, with a vesting option for a 5th year. Bay only lasted 3 years of that contract. All his bad injury luck came roaring back. In 2010, he suffered a concussion in a game against the Dodgers and had to go on the 60-day IL for it. In 2011, he missed 18 games due to a strained rib cage and missed even more time to a neck injury, a hamstring injury, a shoulder injury, and the flu. In 2012, he missed 41 games to another rib injury, and then later suffered yet another concussion in a game against the Reds. Anyone else getting major Ryan Church vibes? He batted .165 that season in just 70 games. Overall, during his time with the Mets, he played in just 288 games out of a possible 486, and batted .234 with only 26 home runs total. It was undoubtedly the worst Mets free agent acquisition since Bobby Bonilla. And of course, it was so like the Mets to trade Bay before his most productive years, and acquire him again after them. This next one is just an absolute classic Mets move. Many fans from this era of Mets baseball who weren't around to see the Tom Seaver trade still refer to this as the worst Mets trade of all time. This is Scott Kazmir. Kazmir was a 6-foot-tall, 185-pound lefty starter from Houston, Texas, who was drafted straight out of high school by the Mets with their first-round number 15 pick in 2002. He was just 18 years old. Kazmir progressed quickly through the Mets minor leagues, making it to AA by the beginning of the 2004 season. He was a very highly touted prospect, and other teams took notice. Teams like the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. At the trade deadline in 2004, the Mets weren't contending. They were in 4th place and 6 games out of 1st. So, they decided to make some trades. But they weren't selling off expiring contracts or aging veterans for more young talent. They were buying. The first trade they made was for pitcher Chris Benson, who we're going to talk a lot about at some point in the next 2 episodes. The Mets traded Ty Wigginton and Jose Bautista for him. Yes, that Jose Bautista. Of course, he was still an extraordinarily young, raw prospect at the time and wouldn't break out for another 6 years or so. But still, wow. Anyway, the second trade was of Scott Kazmir for the Rays' Victor Zambrano. We didn't really need years of comparison to know that this was a bad trade. It seemed like a bad trade at the time, too. Kazmir was a top prospect, and Zambrano really wasn't anything to write home about. In his first year in the majors, Zambrano pitched in 36 games as a reliever to a 3.16 ERA, which isn't bad at all. In the next 2 seasons, however, when he jumped to being a starter, he would pitch to a 5.53 ERA and a 4.21 ERA, as his general pitch control left much to be desired. Mets pitching coach Rick Peterson famously claimed to the Mets brass that he could fix Zambrano. Famous last words. The trade was so bad, even at the time, that a lot of fans speculated that the Mets had somehow messed up and traded for the wrong guy entirely. See, over in Chicago, there was another Venezuelan righty named Zambrano, Carlos Zambrano, who was pitching really well for the Cubs at the time. From 2002 to 2010, Carlos Zambrano never pitched above a 3.95 ERA. He was a 3-time All-Star and Silver Slugger, was top 5 in Cy Young voting for 3 years, and even received some MVP votes in 2004, when he pitched to a 2.75 ERA and went 16-8. Alas, the Mets traded for Victor Zambrano, who was just horrible for the Mets. He never solved his control issues, and he was often injured. By 2006, his ERA ballooned to 6.75. Scott Kazmir made his MLB debut in August of 2004 as a 20-year-old. He became a huge part of the Rays organization and helped them win their division and become AL champions in 2008. A lot of fans hate this trade because of how close the Mets were to contention in the mid to late 2000s. What if they had Kazmir in 2006 for their NLCS run? What if he started that final game against the Marlins in 2007 instead of Tom Glavine, or in 2008 instead of Oliver Perez? Those might have been playoff years instead of horrible collapses. We'll never know. In not even just this episode, but also in the series as a whole, we've looked at a lot of bad Mets trades. But what about the trades they didn't make? Well, here's a couple stories about that too. For the first one, we have to go back to the offseason after 2013. The Mets had an ace pitcher just breaking out in 24-year-old Matt Harvey. Harvey was just coming off his first All-Star appearance and a fourth-place finish in Cy Young voting in just his second season in the big leagues. Unfortunately, towards the end of that season in August, Harvey tore his UCL. In October, he had Tommy John surgery and would go on to miss the entire 2014 season. However, concerns about Harvey's arm didn't stop the Boston Red Sox from inquiring about Harvey during the 2013 winter meetings. Boston had just won the World Series, but had a few expiring deals in their rotation and wanted to secure a young ace to maintain their competitiveness in the future. So who did the Red Sox offer? Well, they knew it would take a lot to get the deal done, since the Mets were very high on Harvey despite his Tommy John surgery. So they offered them their number one prospect, a 20-year-old second baseman and occasional outfielder named Mookie Betts. The Mets flat out refused. I don't even think they considered it for a second. For the time, I get it. Even despite the uncertainty with his arm, you have this proven ace who's young and locked up for years, and you're just supposed to trade him for an unproven minor leaguer at just 20 years old? MLB prospects are such crapshoots that I can't blame the Mets for passing up on this. But good God, is hindsight 2020. Matt Harvey missed all of 2014, but had a fantastic year in 2015. He was also the ace of a rotation that included Jacob deGrom, Noah Syndergaard, and Bartolo Colon, who led the Mets to their first World Series appearance in 15 years. Unfortunately for Harvey, that was his last good season. His ERA ballooned year after year after that, and he had disastrous stints with the Reds, Angels, Royals, and Orioles. 2015 also happened to be Mookie Betts' breakout year. From 2015 to 2019, Betts won an MVP, 4 Gold Gloves, 3 Silver Sluggers, and made 4 All-Star appearances. He also won the World Series with the Red Sox in his MVP year of 2018. Between 2019 and 2020, he was traded to the Los Angeles Dodgers, where he still plays today. Since coming to LA, he's been an All-Star in every year that there's been an All-Star game. He's won 2 more Gold Gloves and 3 more Silver Sluggers, won another World Series, and has generally been considered one of the best players in the league. In November of 2015, some rumors were floating around that the Mets were considering trading Harvey for Betts again. Nothing ever came from it. In 2020, when it became clear the Red Sox weren't going to extend him, the Mets actually pursued Betts. The Mets offered packages that centered around Brandon Nimmo, J.D. Davis, and one of either Andres Jimenez or Ronnie Mauricio. Apparently, the deal fell through, though, because the Mets refused to include Jeff McNeil. Listen, I love Jeff McNeil. I'm a big Jeff McNeil guy. But for fuck's sake, this is fucking Mookie Betts. For the second instance of a trade that never was, we once again have to go to 2015. Opening day, here we are. The Mets are starting 23-year-old infielder Wilmer Flores at shortstop today. He's been in the Mets organization since he was just 16 years old, and he loves it here. Flores has been a highly touted prospect for a while now. He's hit the cover off the ball in the minors, and now, after some up and down stints with the Mets in the past couple years, he's here full-time. The Mets started off 2015 fairly well, until a brief skid in June caused them to slip under 500. Even still, they held on, and now at the trade deadline, they're 52-48, just 1 game back of the Nationals for the division lead. The Mets decide to go for it. They want another bat. So Sandy Alderson calls up Brewers GM Doug Melvin to see what they can offer for outfielder Carlos Gomez. Gomez was actually initially signed by the Mets out of the Dominican Republic. He was a part of the trade to Minnesota back in 2008 that landed the Mets Johan Santana. He's had some great years for the Brewers, too. He's made the All-Star game twice and won a Gold Glove while hitting 19, 24, and 23 home runs in the previous 3 years. He'd be a great addition to this Mets team. The two sides negotiate. They come to a deal. It's Zach Wheeler and Wilmer Flores for Carlos Gomez. Wheeler has potential in 2015, but he's recovering from Tommy John, so he's a question mark more than anything. The Brewers were high on Flores, though. They saw him as a perennial 15 to 20 home run threat that they could convert to be a third baseman. Then things take a turn. The Mets are playing at Citi Field tonight against the San Diego Padres. Wilmer Flores is out there playing shortstop right now. And suddenly, the news breaks. Joel Sherman of the Post tweets out, "It's a done deal. The Mets are getting Gomez." In another tweet, "Mets gave up Zach Wheeler and Wilmer Flores for Gomez. #Brewers." It was all out there now, and the entire stadium knew it. The next inning comes around, and Wilmer Flores is up to bat. He receives a standing ovation, but he has no idea why. He gets another ovation after he grounds out and makes his way back to the dugout. Flores asks his teammates what's going on, but none of them know either. He asks David Wright to check his phone, who goes into the clubhouse to oblige. He emerges moments later and reveals to the team that Flores has in fact been traded. Manager Terry Collins denies it. He says that the phone hasn't rung, so there can't be anything official. But the news is enough for Flores. He breaks down in tears. But he has to go out there and play the game. He hasn't been taken out yet. This whole thing is a mess. Wilmer Flores goes out there and plays shortstop for an entire half inning of a Major League Baseball game, with tears streaming down his face the entire time. Finally, after coming back to the dugout, he is taken out of the game. The game ends. As Flores walks to the training room, he runs into Chief Operating Officer Jeff Wilpon, who tells him there's no trade. Apparently, Mets doctors weren't a fan of Carlos Gomez's physicals, and the deal just fell apart. And that was that. Wilmer Flores remained a Met, and he endeared himself to Mets fans everywhere, while at the same time, the Mets front office embarrassed themselves once again. How on earth do you let Flores stay in that game for as long as he did? That's the unbelievable part for me. You have never heard another story like this because there are protocols to prevent this kind of thing from happening. No, it wasn't the end of the world, and Flores' display of emotion made himself a fan favorite overnight. But that's Trade 101 stuff. It never should have happened in the first place. He should have been out of that game the moment the negotiation started. All's well that ends well, I guess. Post All-Star break, the Mets picked up right where they left off, going 8-5 through the end of July. They split a 4-game set with the Marlins, in which Jeff McNeil hit 3 home runs, including a 2-homer day for the series opener. Then they won 2 straight in Yankee Stadium, including a 12-3 win where the team absolutely shelled Yankees ace Garrett Cole. Between the last game of the Marlins series, these 2 at Yankee Stadium, and then the next 2 wins against Atlanta at Citi Field, the Mets have won 5 in a row once again. This Atlanta series is incredibly important for playoff implications, so it's a good thing Jeff McNeil and Francisco Lindor are both absolutely on fire right now. In the 10th inning of this second Atlanta game, McNeil hit a walk-off base hit on this fly ball.
Long one for Laureano, and he runs it, and the Mets win the ball.
This type of blooper is supposed to happen to the Mets, not the Braves. We aren't supposed to win games this way, we're supposed to lose them. With that second win, the Mets are now in firm position of not the third, not the second, no, the first National League wild card position. From being completely dead 2 months ago to now in the throes of a heated playoff race, this team has got some kind of magic, if nothing else. Unfortunately, the Mets lost the next 2 against Atlanta, splitting that series and pushing them back down to the third wildcard spot. However, they then won another 2 straight against the Minnesota Twins, including a 15-2 pounding for the opener, which put them right back in second. But then, a loss against the Twins the next day, as well as wins by Atlanta, San Diego, and Arizona, pushed the Mets out of the wild card entirely. Going into August, they're now on the outside looking in. It gets worse, though. It always does. On July 26th, Kodai Senga made his first start of the season against the Braves. He pitched exceptionally, allowing just 2 runs through 5 innings. But then, in the top of the 6th, while running off the mound to cover first off an Austin Riley pop-up, this happen.
He's got it, but Senga is hurt.
No,
Senga, after missing the entire first half of the season, now has a high-grade left calf strain. He will miss the entire rest of the season. A hell of a lot can change in 3 days. That's just the roller coaster of Mets baseball, baby. In terms of the Mets trade deadline acquisitions, well, there's really not a lot to go by yet. Jesse Winker's played in 3 games and has gone 2 for 6.
Phil Maton was acquired the earliest back in the beginning of July, and he's been pitching well.
Ryan Stanek had a bad appearance against Atlanta, but then a decent one against the Twins, too. Brazoban also had a good appearance against the Twins. Tyler Zuber was immediately optioned to AAA Syracuse, and Paul Blackburn hasn't made a start yet, but he's slated to go August 2nd. So for most of these guys, we'll have to monitor how they do in August to really see how the Mets fared. Let's just hope we get some good contributions during this tight playoff race. Until next time.